Hey everyone, this is the results from the Dutch Nationals 2023. Let's go. I already made videos about the lists and I made a meta video where I did my predictions. So this is going to be the actual results, what actually happened. I will also release a number of games that I recorded, and I'll release some bad reps where I talk you through my games and what I think happened, and so lots of content for you guys. Let's go and see the results, shall we? So, the Dutch Nationals 2023, the results and the main takeaways, the main things I think we can learn from them. The event itself was 22 players. About half of us were non-Dutch, and around half were Dutch players. And the hilarious thing was that the organizer had miscalculated, so they had 10 tables when they needed 11. So, and they quickly discovered the mistake, and Martin Schneiderman had brought terrain enough for 4 more tables, so we just set up an extra table. It was no problem at all. The cool thing about that was that we had to decide at that point. I was getting involved a lot at that point because we had slept in the actual Tabletopper shop. So we were there from very early morning and just helped around and set up everything. And the actual cool thing was that we could decide then: do we want them in the ground floor? Do we want them upstairs? Or do we want them outside? Because they had a north-facing, shady parking lot outside the shop. And we set it up outside. And that table was so popular because it was fresh air, and it was very hot during the event. It was like 30-something degrees most of the time. So we were baking. Even though they had set up fans and coolers and everything, it was still amazingly hot. So on day 2, we actually moved a lot of the tables outside, just because that one table was it was amazing. So that actually was a fortunate miscalculation there. It all took place in Tabletopper, which, for those of you who don't know, I'll link in the description, is in Akron in Holland, and it's more or less the European main distributor for all things historically game related. So like Warlord Games, Flames of War, all of that. He has a huge web shop, and we were in his actual company rooms. So there was a lot of minis all around us, and we were happy, and a lot of people bought stuff, including myself. We played 5 games, and the first one was Key Positions. Then we played Heartbreak Ridge, No Man's Land, Double Development, and finished up with the finale in Sectors. The draw was such that for the first game, Dutch were facing non-Dutch, so that all Dutch players got to play at least one of the international players, and the international players didn't actually get to play other. I mean, I had come down with 5 of my Danes, right, and we play each other, not necessarily all of us regularly, but more often than not, right? So it was really nice to be able to play some of the Dutch, to be able to meet them in person and hang out with them, and they were amazingly cool people. I mean, it was just an enormously enjoyable event on all levels, and a lot of the players were new players, or there was even thematic players, and some of the thematic players did really well. Some of the new players did really well, which was always cool to see. And I do hope that none of the new players felt that the international top players, like myself, Manuel, Thomas, that we didn't go there to just break face. We did come there to win, of course we did, but we were also trying to be good about it and trying to teach, which I hope that everyone sort of got that. I know at least I really tried to talk my opponent through all decisions, and gave some chances that I maybe wouldn't have done in highly competitive games, but which made sense as well. So yeah, and it was just very, very enjoyable. We all went out to a restaurant on Saturday evening. Uh, Michael got really drunk and insulted the hostess. But apart from that, everything went just absolutely fine. I was knackered, so I went to bed early. I apologize for being boring and just leaving at that point. But and you can possibly hear it, I have a head cold still. And I'm just, so I was slightly off and sick. I went back to the shop and just crashed. So, right, that was the event. Now, I had predicted sort of this. Um, Go look at my meta video. I'll link in the description where I talk through. I didn't actually put out my predictions for top 5, but I did make a what to watch. I felt bad about making a prediction for top 5 because I was putting myself in the top 5 bracket. But my predictions, just based on lists and knowing the players a little bit, um, was that the 3 best lists would, in my opinion, clearly in my the bow scale, right, the 1 to 5, would clearly be Danny's 16 Order Dice Greatest Hits Americans, which was the same list he brought to Zealand Open, more or less, minor changes, but more or less, and he won Zealand Open with that. So I knew the list, I knew the player as well. The list for me is very, very strong American build. Go and watch my video. I think me and Alistair talked about his list, maybe. Maybe we didn't. Anyways, I think it's in one of my videos on the lists. Then my own list, I definitely talked with Alistair about that, which is my dual platoon British assault. It's Gurkhas, it's Stewards, it's all the nastiness, and I had argumented that with some early war motorcycles, which worked out well. Not as they mean that they died some games, but so that they weren't like massively game deciding, but they really worked out well for skirmish. And then Manuel's 21 Order Dice Soviet Hordes with tanks. I have seen Manuel do this many times. I know exactly what he can do with bunches of Stratbad Shirkers. So that is a good build. It's a horde build, and he pours all the extra points into tanks. A very, very strong build as well. Although definitely not for everyone. I think most players would struggle using that army. Then I had 2 I put in the top bracket as well, knowing the players and them having 3.5, which strong competitive armies, but not necessarily the strongest armies at an event, right? Like 4s are very strong competitive armies, 3.5s are strong competitive armies, but not very strong. I had Michael C, who had made a all-forward deploy Soviet army, 17 order dice, with 2 Katyushas, so multi-rocket launchers. I felt like double Katyushas was a mistake, so that pushed him down to a 3.5, but he is on the HWTC team. He always does well when he remembers to play the game and not be sad about losing the last game, or forgets to read the mission, but he normally does well. And so I put him in the top bracket as well. And then Martin Snyderman, whom we see next to me. You can already see that he did well because he's holding a trophy. He had a 19 Order Dice Greatest Hit British Indian platoon, and that is just always a very good platoon, right? He's basically playing with 1,200 points instead of 1,000 because he gets both the Indians and the Free Artillery Observer, which, by the way, I think you shouldn't be allowed to do that, but he totally was. I had chosen not to do it for specific other reasons, but so it was just a very, very strong list, and he is on the Dutch WTC team. He's a very strong player, so I felt like he could do good with that list, being a very strong list and him being a good player. And obviously he did, because he won. I didn't get to play Martin, which I was sad about, but he played against some other very, very good players and won. He won all his games. He was the only player who did. And So yeah, well done, Martin. He did so with his British Army list. Myself, I came second. I was undefeated, but I did not manage to win all my games. I had two draws, one against Manuel and the other against Danny. Both of the games were extremely close, I have to say, and I will get back to some game reports on that. I think for at least for the game against Danny, had it not been for a like I need 6 6 and 3 plus and then a 50 plus chance again. Had it not been for like the last shot being a Hail Mary where he actually killed something, I would have won that game. So it was very, I was ahead and he needed some extreme luck and he got it. But there was also other things that decided the game. I'll get back to that. And my game against Manuel was like playing 5D chess. It was amazing. It was the best game ever. A draw, which I felt like had I got just a few more minutes, I would have won. So again, amazing, cool game. Michael came fifth, and he actually lost, I think, 2 games, but he he won the rest. So he was the top of the bracket for people who had lost 2 games, um, and he had a lot of kill dice as well. By the way, both me, Danny, and Manuel had a lot of kill dice. I think I ended up with the most, but it was a lot of dice. They as a tiebreaker, they counted the dice that you killed from your opponent. A third tiebreaker would be strength of schedule, so the how did your opponent do. So, and then we come to the people who didn't actually go into the top 5, who didn't win any trophies, but who ended up in the top half, like so the top 10, 11 people here. Why did I not put 11? Because we were 22. I needed one more guy. Who was the last one? Oh, it was Kent's Japanese. I'll talk about him later. Sorry about that, Kent. Right. So the thing about the number 6 to number 11 for me is that they were, most of them, trying to do something, trying to do some very specific thing and succeeding, but not actually winning the top 5 places, if you get what I mean. They were doing something like trying to make Germany great again, or bringing a minor nation and trying to make that work, or something. They were trying to prove some points, and building very specific armies and actually managing to get in the top 50%, not managing to just clinch it yet. So, for instance, Thomas, he brought a British army. For me, it felt like he was trying to prove that Brits were overpowered and that he could just pick up a British army and play it. And it didn't quite work out for him. I absolutely trashed him in sectors. We were quite equal on kill points, but in the victory points for that mission, I had 24, he had 11, so not even close. So I think his point that you can take a British army and do well, I don't think that worked. But he did, because he's a very good player. He did end up in 6th place, which was well deserved. Then we had Philip Mason, who was trying to prove that you can not take tanks, and he came 7th without any tanks. He did have 3 Bren carriers though, but no tanks. And I think we gave him a lot of crap for that, and for that I do apologize, Philip, because you were right. You can take tanks and do well. You did so. I thought you couldn't, because your results from Sealand Open, Phil had taken almost the same list as Sealand Open and not gone well. But then he brought it to an event in Scotland and really did well. And he brought it down to Holland as well and really did well. So I think he's proving his point that you can take no tanks and do something good, which is very, very cool to see. Then we have Jesper, one of my Danes. He had brought Americans. He was trying to prove that air observers could be a thing. Unfortunately, Jesper, he ran into every single army at the event who had any flak. So his airplanes really did nothing for most games. I think the one game where he actually felt like they could have won him the game was against Manuel, and then he rolled a rookie pilot, and it didn't. But but he played 3 armies that had lots of flak. So in most of his games, he was down 200 points. So he was playing with 800 points and still managed to get 8th place, which was amazing, really cool. But no one is convinced by the air observers at Jesper. Sorry, they're convinced by your Americans. You were really good, but air observers, nah, maybe not. And then we have Patrick. Patrick is an amazing guy. He is just, and he had brought his really cool Germans who have really cool bases, by the way. And for me, that was a 3 list. It was nothing special, but it was amazingly themed. It was themed around the Fallschirmjägers that actually fought right next to the village that he lives in. So they were green Fallschirmjägers, and he had given them lots of gear, and he brought them to prove that you could theme, you could really care about your bases, because his bases are just amazing, look so cool. You can really care about something like that, like modeling stuff, thematic stuff, and do well, making Germany great again. And he ended up in 9th place. Really cool. Very well done, Patrick. Love it. Love it to bits. And then Kaspar, who brought Bulgaria. Kaspar's main point, I think, he is a very thematic player, but at the same time, he does want to win. So he was trying to prove that you can take minor nations and do something good, and he really did. Getting top place, like top 10, with a Bulgarian list for someone who's not a very competitive player, really well done. Really well done, Kaspar. I really enjoyed that. That was an amazing little achievement for you. The final one I need to mention is Kent, who is the final Danish player, because all Danish players ended up in the top 50%. And Kent is a newer player, very competitive. He had brought Japanese, and he hasn't actually done anything but like he has played in 2 tournaments before, 2, and he has started in the last 6 months. His main achievement is doing rather well for a new beginner in a tournament in Jutland, and then coming second in one of my rookie tournaments where only rookies could place, right? So his placement here is really well done for a new player who had the first taste of an international competition. Really well done. And with Japanese, he was the only Japanese player, and he was trying to prove that Japanese can still work. He did so. Unfortunately, he ran into me, and I'm an expert at murdering Japanese, so he had a bad loss against me, which sucks. But so the main takeaways are good players win. All the players that ended up in the top brackets here are players that I would have expected to end up there. So just knowing the players. So that's pretty clear. I think the only player who I maybe would have expected to maybe do well, but then the list was Pim, who was also on the Dutch WTC team, but didn't manage to do so. He had brought a double Death Star list, and it didn't work. So that was like the only player I would have expected to maybe end up there. And the rest are all players where I would expect them to end up in the top 50%. So if we're just talking guessing by players, I think I'm at 90% right on guessing by players who would end up there. Another takeaway is that good players will typically bring good lists. So they will bring at least competitive lists, strong competitive, or very strong lists. Um, so it's sometimes it's difficult to separate what what how much the list actually means. But if you look at the top placements, I think it's pretty safe to say that um, good players are the most determining factor. It it really is. But lists do play a part. Good players also mostly bring good nations, at least for this event. I think that was to do with the pack. So most of the top players have brought Soviets, Americans, or British, um, and that's just the thing. German lists are way down in the rankings for this event, although other events recently have shown that you can do well with German lists, and we are all looking forward to what happens with Case Blue and Tough God, how that will change the meta for Germans. I'll also say that this is now official, barbecuing is out. No one had brought all barbecue lists, like spamming flamethrowers. Um, so they're just out. People don't bring it anymore, and there's no like massive benefit to having a lot of flamethrowers. 2 flamethrowers was kind of common. I think both Thomas and Danny had brought 2 flamethrowers. If we're looking at the top bracket, I can't remember if Martin had 2 flamethrowers as well. He might have had. Um, so barbecuing is out. A few flamethrowers is in, but barbecuing is out. Multi-rocket launchers, though, are back in. A lot of players had 1, maybe 2, and that was really key for some games and some tables. Then we have to talk about it, Pim. Death Stars, I'm sorry, they haven't been made good yet. They are out. Pim's Death Stars, Double D Shermans, they did survive most games, but they didn't win him any games. So I think we can safely say that Death Stars is not a thing. No one else who brought a heavy tank actually did well with it. So yeah, that's what we can learn there. I'm still a little on the fence about do we need tanks at events? Do you need tanks to bring? Do you need to bring tanks in order to do well with the list? I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to do an experiment and I declare it here, and it's for your sake, Phil. Um, I will at my next tournament not bring any tanks. I'm going to take my partisans, and I'll take 0 tanks if I can. I'm trying to build the list, and it's not easy without any tanks because I can only take 1 platoon, and or it's difficult to build a partisan platoon that where you spend the points. But I'll try, and I will try to do well. I will try to win, but I'll bring 0 tanks, and I won't even bring a good nation. Partisans is the middle of the pack, right? It's not top tier nation, so that will be an experiment for everyone to see. That was the main takeaways. Thank you everyone who attended the Dutch Nationals. Thank you so much for making this a very enjoyable weekend. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves. I certainly did. It was really, really cool seeing everyone, and it was very, very good games, good terrain, good venue. Nice to have the shop there. Wasn't that far to a good restaurant as well. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.